Hey guys, so this is just a short response to an AndyPants video about the woke YouTubers. So right off the bat, I don't give a shit about any beef that he has with these YouTubers. I am just making this because I totally disagree with what he thinks in regards to the structure of these gaming companies, and especially to what he thinks about these quote-unquote billionaires. So in other words, the CEOs, the presidents, the investors, the shareholders, etc., who he thinks want what we want and are going to be the saving grace of this industry, when before all of this DEI bullshit took over, they were actually the main enemy, for lack of a better word, that we had, as they were constantly trying to nickel and dime us to the point of almost turning certain games into glorified casinos. This whole thing with Belial, or whatever the fuck his name is, who I've never even heard of before, Skill Up, who I have heard of before. I used to watch him and his brother over on Layman Gaming a very long time ago, and Actman, who I am a bit more familiar with in terms of content. I just don't care about any of it. I don't give a fuck what these guys do with their channels. I think if you're shilling, then it will be reflected on your views and reputation. For example, nobody trusts a goddamn thing that gaming journalists from main outlets like IGN and Kotaku say anymore, and so it's not really of my interest. Besides, as a YouTuber, you're free to make content about whatever you want, so long as you're not being disingenuous. Not calling something woke, for example, is smart, because you stand to gain a lot more if you actually dissect the game's problem, lay it out, identify it, and tackle it specifically. So for example, take the recent situation with the top surgery scars being added in Veilguard in the name of inclusion and diversity. It's very easy to just call it woke, but it's also very easily dismissible because it's reductive. But if you instead lay out the issues that make it not work, such as the setting of the game, which makes no sense for any surgeries to be conducted when there's Tevinter magic that does it, plus the fact that there's a clear discrepancy against female characters with no prominent features like curves, booty, or bust size, then you can more clearly lay out that it's not about diversity and inclusion. And it is instead purely ideological, since such procedures in the world of Dragon Age would not leave any scars. And if you want to straight up create an attractive female character that isn't built like a flat 2x4, then you simply aren't included. At least this way you've got actual arguments that can convince people, and even if you can convince them, at least you know that you laid out your argument, and if they result to insults or something and can't actually respond to your points, then they're just clowning themselves. And on the off chance that someone actually has a valid response, and you can get a good discussion going, which can actually be helpful. Then he also mentions this about the uglification of women, which is another taboo topic that can actually be complicated and subjective, because there's characters like Aloy, for example, who are often used in memes about uglified female characters in the West, but she's also a character who not everyone finds ugly at all, and the screenshots that are used aren't even part of the released game. And then, for example, there's also this Fable character that has this ugly ass picture, but it's also made a complicated issue because it comes across as a screenshot taken at a bad moment. So like, for example, when someone takes a picture of you yawning. So basically, if you've got a big audience that's been there since way before the rise of this quote-unquote woke stuff, then why fuck with it, with complicated, heated and subjective issues such as these, when you can just keep making different kind of content? Besides, I watched a video that AndyPants featured in this video of his, where Actman talks about Concord, and he does actually call the characters ugly, and even makes a joke about them not being bangable. So, like, you know what I mean? Anyway, fuck it, I don't know and I don't care. Like I said, this is his beef. I just think that people can make whatever content they want to make, whatever they feel is fitting to their audience. I think when a creator is being fake or disingenuous, their audience will eventually call them out. I know Actman got into some cringe last year when he blasted Az from Heel vs Babyface for his Starfield rant about this shit infesting the movie, TV show and games industry. And then, earlier this year, Actman discovers what Sweet Baby Inc. is, and he pulls back the curtain a little bit to see what the fuck is going on behind it, and makes those tweets asking those questions like, why the fuck would they hire an agency? Shouldn't they keep this in-house? So I think that maybe if he had seen Az's rant now rather than a year ago, maybe he wouldn't have replied to it like that. But regardless, I honestly just don't care.
I don't care.
What I want to get into is the part about the companies. So Andy claims a couple of things that I disagree with. The first is that in the structure of these companies, he lays out the president and the board of directors up top, which represents the nameless, faceless billionaire investors, and then he separates the studio heads and creatives and then the major developer workforce to the bottom, and as the source of blame for everything that is going on with these games. Studio heads and creatives are not the bottom at all, they are the higher-ups at these studios. They're obviously not the higher-ups at the companies and publishers as a whole, but they are the literal project leads. They are the ones who set the vision that everyone else has to follow. For example, Concord is known for having that principal game designer who wanted everyone to call her the Professor, as well as wanted everyone who was unvaccinated to get fired. Now, how much power did she have at the company? I obviously don't know, but clearly it was enough to annoy the developer that leaked this information out. The lower rung of these studios, the developer workforce, is very likely comprised of a lot of normal people who don't even like this shit, but do it for a living. One of the reasons why we sometimes get massive leaks and exposés on these studios is because of developers who get fed up with shit like this and leak it to journalists. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of woke people working in these studios at these levels. It's obvious that some of them are there. Sometimes we even see their unhinged tweets. And let's not forget how Sweet Baby Inc. was born and bred by developers just like these. But there's a lot of normal people just doing their job too. And at the core of a failure is the studio heads and creatives that actually manage and lead these projects, that set the vision that everyone has to follow. Look at Concord, for example. The studio heads must have wanted the character design to be that bad. I refuse to believe that they wanted something good, and it was the workforce that fucked it all up so spectacularly. You would have to be recruiting designers from the kindergarten in order to get those results. Concord's designs are so fucking bad, they wouldn't even be hung up on the refrigerator. If I handed these to my dad when I was a kid, he would rip them to shreds, throw them in the trash and not say a single word. The only thing remaining would be a visual manifestation of pain in his eyes as he thought about where did it all go wrong. Either that or a studio head who has incredibly bad taste. We can also look at Mass Effect Andromeda as another example that has nothing to do with wokeness. The utter mess that it resulted in all came down to terrible management from those studio heads and creatives at BioWare, with a little bit of extra bullshit added in from some higher-ups at EA wanting to push their Frostbite engine and etc. The individual developers were going through hell trying to make that game work, and the final product was a result of a mere 18 months of development. The second thing that Andy mentions is how billionaires are actually on our side, wanting to bring us what we want so they can make money. And this is just nuts to me, because those studio heads and creatives didn't assign themselves to those positions on their own. These studios didn't dive headfirst into DEI policy bullshit to increase ESG scores so they could simp to BlackRock on their own. I think Andy is underplaying just how much control these board of director types actually have in these companies that they invested so much money into. I have a lot of difficulty believing that these directors don't know what the fuck is going on in their own companies, as they keep hiring and promoting activists as developers. All it takes is one look from these directors and investors for them to see just how much money Disney is bleeding by doubling down on this kind of shit without trying to level it out and integrate it with good writing, good stories, etc. So they've had plenty of warning calls and time to protect their own companies and consumers, since they're supposed to be on our side after all, by preventing this exact thing from happening. But they haven't done that. This is not to say that Bellular is correct when he apparently said that it's the billionaires' fault. Disclaimer, I may have watched the Eggman's video, but I haven't watched anything from Bellular. I'm taking AndyPants' video's word for it. If he's bullshitting, then please ignore this point. But if he's actually telling the truth and he did blame it all solely on the billionaires, then yeah, it is pretty much straight up I mean, sure, billionaires aren't firing anyone and looking after their properties properly, but the shit content is still being conceptualized by the creatives and studio heads. It's not the fucking billionaires that are coming down from the skies and telling the creatives and the studio heads to make them shit content. And it's also, of course, being designed by the developers themselves. You could say that the billionaires have a responsibility to weed these morons out of positions of power in their companies, but the fault of the failures are still on the actual studio heads guys and creatives for wanting to inject political activism and propaganda into their games, or wanting to hire companies like Sweet Baby Inc., who openly admit that that's what they're aiming to do to the entire industry. But it is to say that these billionaires haven't done anything to stop it either, because so far it served them to do this. It served them just fine to go hard on these ideological things, as they believed that they were going to get benefits from them. They are just as complacent in what's going on, in the decisions being made. It's only now that it's crashing on top of their heads that they're scrambling. These directors and investors only care about one thing, their bottom line, not about us. They're not on our side, they never have been. They jump at the chance of hiking up their prices, they jump at the chance of injecting predatory monetization schemes, and they have always been waiting for an opportunity to make more money. This is why we've had so many issues with live services, loot boxes, and etc. over these past years, because of the faceless, nameless shareholders wanting to maximize their profits year after year via milking the gaming industry for all that it has to offer. Remember that these issues became so big that it exploded when EA was monetizing the shit out of Battlefront 2 and got taken to court for it. Our games were basically on the verge of becoming casinos for kids. So no, I don't think these directors and investors are on our side. I don't think that they're the salvation for our industry. I don't think that they're sitting around thinking about us and what we want. You could say that we have a common goal when it comes to washing all of this DEI policy shit and activists out of our entertainment. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the board of directors who don't know how to make a game taking over a studio is a good thing, and let's not forget that they're the ones who approved of these activists and DEI policies to take over their companies in the first place. If anything, they're known for making terrible decisions. They shut studios down all the time instead of nurturing them into solid studios. Earlier this year, Embracer Group cancelled a Deus Ex game that was 2 years in development and put the studio working on a live service. So they cancelled the fucking Deus Ex game for some online live service bullshit that is guaranteed to be trash, if it even reaches completion to begin with, unless by some miracle the gaming customer base suddenly gets a hard-on for online live services again. These board of directors types can be complete fucking morons. And for example, the Ubisoft situation, it's not like I even would care that much if they actually axed the whole damn team. I don't think any of us would really miss them that much, to be honest, but I do care about other publishers and studios. For example, I care dearly about Warner Brother games and their properties. I'm a big fan of the Batman Arkham games, the Middle-earth Shadow games, I love the Mad Max game that they made back in 2015, I'm a big fan of Hogwarts Legacy, so on and so forth. All of these properties are fucked because they got a CEO who wants to take all of this into the live service road, while conveniently ignoring just how fucking dogshit Soy Squad turned out, to the point where there were more active players playing the Batman Arkham Knight game than Soy Squad at launch. The ideal thing here would be for these board of director types to start weeding out the activists in the studio head and creative section, and also taking out or supervising their in-house DEI departments, so that they could basically have a proper balance between the game they're making, the story they're telling, the portrayal of the characters, etc., all in a natural way, and then actually fitting and non-political diversity that we've had in our games for fucking decades without anyone, except the retarded activists terminally online on Twitter who aren't even gamers themselves, complaining about it. More than that, like total oversight from people who have no clue what gamers actually want can be absolutely disastrous. If we could just get back to naturally having people who love video games and are passionate about telling great stories through awesome games ahead of video game development studios, then that would be the ideal thing. But it's gonna take some time, because taking care of the weeds in a big backyard doesn't get done overnight. Especially because I doubt that they can even do what Andy actually mentioned, which is to get rid of everyone and replace them with people who can actually deliver us a masculine game. I think this whole ESG and BlackRock shit still holds a lot of power in these circles, regardless of all of these flops showing that it's not what people want, and companies can simply pull these big sudden moves without consequences, know what I mean? I mean, hell, you can even ignore the whole ESG and DEI and BlackRock part of the equation and just think about the game's media. They're always on the hunt for something to attack relentlessly, so if a studio suddenly announced new leadership, new creatives, new studio heads, and a new developer workforce without any DEI initiatives, the game's journalists would not be giving that a rest at all. Fucking Kotaku employees would be having literal seizures over it. But anyway, that's it for me on this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.